So today I'll be sharing about restorative justice, having recently received training from Restorative Collective Vancouver, which I attend as a representative of the Living Interfaith Sanctuary. So when I joined as its managing director, Kathy was like, this is an amazing organization, please go as our representative, it's very important. She couldn't be there herself, but she really advocated for it and made sure that I went, and it opened up all these other opportunities. And so I recently was trained to be what we're calling a peacemaker in my neighborhood, which is Hastings Sunrise. And I'm going to begin by sharing a little bit about restorative justice and circle processes. And then rather than talking the whole time, I'd like to facilitate a short talking circle. So probably just one question with you all so that you can experience the process yourselves. I'm going to share some slides. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, perfect.
So today's topic, as I mentioned, is healing through restorative justice. And I wanted to start by sharing a little bit about my personal interest in peace and justice and where that came from. In many of these situations, I was more of an observer than a participant, but in others, I was the recipient of harm, and in others, I was the perpetrator of harm. So this is not to say I'm a perfect person who always does everything right. It's more just to say this is where things that impacted me or hurt my heart, and that's what spiked my interest in this. So I would say it started growing up in a family that, like many families, is not very emotionally intelligent, possibly a lot of repressed emotion, a lot of explosive emotion when it does come out, a lot of trauma that hasn't been processed. And so just witnessing the power dynamics in a family setting and the injustice present in that, I think was very, really affected me deeply and made me very interested in what are healthy power dynamics? What do those look like? How can we support and perpetuate those in ourselves and those around us? The next, I think, most impactful stage for me was entering high school and just seeing the differences in race and gender and how those play out in group settings. I think recognizing how men see women and objectify them was very eye-opening for me. And like, you know, as a 13-year-old girl, you start getting objectified by men. And so I think it's just something that was like something I had to wrap my mind around, like, oh, this is the way the world operates. This is how things are. And then racial tension, seeing the way that you get into a high school setting and people split off into separate groups, and kind of like the tensions. I remember there being a lot of gangs, like there were white gangs and Asian gangs, and they were always fighting. And so just things like that you start to realize are happening, and you're like, where do I stand in this? What do I do? After high school, I did a year abroad as a volunteer preschool teacher in Arusha, Tanzania, and it just so happened that they were holding the tribunals for the Rwandan genocide there at the time. And so I didn't know much about it. I was only 18, but the woman who led my program, she told me that you should go. This is a really big deal. You should go sit in on these because anyone can go sit in. So I remember going and sitting in and watching some of these trials and just hearing the descriptions of what had happened to people during the genocide. That was really impactful for me. And it actually is what inspired me later to write my undergraduate thesis on genocide. I think I just wanted to understand, like, how do these things happen? Why do they happen? It was clear to me that any of us, under the right circumstances, this could be us. And so I think I just really wanted to understand that. And it also inspired me later to become a journalist. So after that, I did go to journalism school. And my first real position was in Venezuela, where I lived for 4.5 years, working as a journalist, and witnessed a lot of injustice there. I kind of saw the way that a government can slowly tighten its control over a population, and experienced some things that made me very angry, such as watching an elderly woman get heavily tear gassed at a peaceful protest. And right now, Venezuelans, as some of you may know, are dealing with the fallout of a highly contested election. So it's a place where many people are suffering, and it's still very close to my heart. And then Kashmir, I just happened to be spending some time in Kashmir, which is a contested region, Muslim majority region in northern India. And I was there in August 2019 when its autonomy was taken away. So that's a lengthy story that I won't get into here, but just suffice it to say that despite the fact that I didn't personally witness any physical violence, and that's not to say that it wasn't happening, it was one of the most psychologically ruthless and inhumane actions I've ever seen a government take against its people. And that also made me very angry. And so what do we do with this anger? How do we find peace when we've harmed others or we've been harmed by others, whether in community or within ourselves? So I've learned in recent years that healthy anger presents itself when a boundary has been crossed. And so for healing to recur, it's important to both restore that boundary and to address the harm inflicted. So I thought we'd look at what is restorative justice. So in contrast to the Western criminal justice system, which focuses on punishing a perpetrator and compensating a victim, restorative justice is a holistic, relational, and community-centered approach to harm and healing. So often the system of punishment and compensation only can perpetuate the injustice present, because so often those who are punished, they again commit a crime in the future. So it's often not the most effective system. So where does restorative justice come from? Restorative justice has strong roots in First Nations and Native American societies, as well as Indigenous cultures in Africa, New Zealand, and elsewhere. Two common approaches include conferences, adapted from New Zealand's Maori traditions, and circles, adapted from North American First Nations peoples. And contemporary use, since the 1970s, restorative justice has been used as an alternative to the criminal justice system in countries such as Canada, the US, Australia, Japan, and New Zealand, as well as several in Europe and the UK. And restorative justice also served as the foundation for South Africa's post-apartheid truth and reconciliation process. Some of you may have heard the Zulu term Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And that's a very strong underpinning of worldview for many African people that I've spoken to, and is also very much aligned with the concept of restorative justice. Interestingly, the first modern use of restorative justice in Canada's criminal justice system is often named as being in 1974, which was through the Mennonite Central Committee. And it's since been widely popularized by a Mennonite named Howard Zare. So I'm someone with Mennonite ancestry, and so I feel this ancestral connection as well to the restorative justice process. And this information comes from two books. One is The Little Book of Restorative Justice by Howard Zare, and the second is The Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice by Fania Davis. So this is a graphic from Restorative Collective Vancouver that they had an Indigenous graphic artist create. And it's, I like it because it shows how big the concept of restorative justice is. So it's not just, it is, conflict resolution, but it is also so much bigger than that. How do we live restoratively in community? How do we interact restoratively with our environment? How do we create a society in which needs are not being met? And so people don't need to commit crimes in order to feed their children, for example. So it's just a really large concept, and it can often appear kind of vague, but I think that's also what keeps it vibrant and alive and prevents it from being stagnant. It's a very bottom down rather than a bottom up rather than a top down approach, which can be weird and uncomfortable for people who aren't used to that. But I think is also what makes it so important. We have to do things differently if things are going to change. So I'm going to take of all that huge possibility within restorative justice, I'm going to narrow it down to talk today about circle processes. And this is what I was trained to do through Restorative Collective Vancouver. So there were about 30 of us that were trained as peacemakers, and we went through 6 hours of conflict resolution training and privilege bias training, 15 hours of trauma training with an Indigenous elder, 15 hours of circle training, and we're doing ongoing training as we begin to hold talking circles. So the idea is we'll eventually hold peace circles for people for neighborhood disputes, maybe eventually for criminal activity. But we're starting very small. So we're starting with talking circles just to get people used to, especially people in the community, familiar with what these look like, how they operate, and the power of them. And so that way we build trust within the community slowly, and then we start to utilize them more for peacemaking purposes. So there's some key aspects of circle processes. So these are led by facilitators. So someone trained to do this. All the key stakeholders in a conflict in a peace circle would all voluntarily have to be involved. So say there was an offense committed against someone that caused harm. The offender and the person who was offended against would have to agree that they want to do this. It's not something anyone can oppose on anyone else. They would want to be able to come together and seek justice restoratively. It uses a talking piece, as we practiced earlier. So this is to ensure that everyone has an equal voice, that it's not just one person speaking. Of course, there's always the right to pass, but it just ensures that everyone is contributing and that everyone else is listening when someone is contributing. Common values that are important are dignity, respect, responsibility, inclusion, reparation, non-domination, and mutual care. And then the process has 3 main goals. The first is acknowledging the harm. So people often ask, how is restorative justice different from mediation? And one of the ways that it is that mediators will often come into a situation assuming that both parties have their perspectives, they're both on equal footing and equal ground. And in restorative justice, there needs to be acknowledgement that somebody was harmed. And that's kind of, if that comes through in the circle process, that can be the process that allows that to happen. And so just hearing the stories and hearing the feelings of the people in the circle allows that to occur. The second goal is restoring equity. So acknowledging that harm, what do we do to bring things back into balance? What needs to happen? And then setting intentions for the future. What is that going to look like in the future? How will things be different? And, you know, I think this is one of the reasons that restorative justice in corporate settings, a lot of corporations do use restorative justice, but I think it's challenging because, and I think there's a lot of potential there for good things to happen, but the challenge is that things do have to change, and that change has to come from the bottom, and I think that is very challenging for corporate executives. So some of the common elements of circle processes, there's a kind of a set series of steps that you go through, but I just want to recognize some of the ones that we went through already in our service. So we had an opening check-in during the sharing of our hearts. And we had a clarification of values in our joint affirmation. So these are some of the values that I pulled out from, like, directly from our joint affirmation that we named together. So these are peace, joy, love, compassion, justice, mutual respect, and alignment of our lives, beliefs, and actions. So I'll just invite you to reflect on those values and how that might align with the way that you bring yourself into this circle today. Normally in a circle process, we'd work together to create guidelines, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to invite you to do that, to live out your values in the circle that we share today. And then also to, these are 2 main guidelines that we try to include, which are respect the talking piece. So if someone is holding the talking piece, give them your full attention. Don't talk back to them. Don't speak up when someone else is talking. And then also the right to pass. So if you don't want to share, you're not required to. So I'm just going to unspotlight myself. And I'm going to read this quote from Howard Zare. Respect reminds us of our interconnectedness, but also of our differences. Respect insists we balance concerns for all parties. If we pursue justice as respect, we will do justice restoratively. And so the question that I wanted to invite you all to share with me in exploring today is, what does being respected mean to you? And I think this is an important question, not as just as a human being, but also as an interfaith community. What does it mean to have your different views respected? What does it mean to have your humanity respected? So we'll go in the same order as we did earlier, and I'll start with the talking piece that I have here. And I haven't thought through my answer yet to this question, so I'm in the same boat as all of you. So what does being respected mean to me? I think it means being seen as a whole person, being treated kindly, not having my space or my being infringed upon. So not being, like, whether that's physically or psychologically, and being listened to and held gently. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to pass it to you, Paul G.
Thank you so much. I think to be respected means I'm valued, we are honored, and we are also considered to be worthy of esteem. I think it implies and recognizes that we all have inherent dignity in us. We all have rights. We all have individuality. And if you ask me to actually say in a very concrete 5 key aspects that I understand is, number one, recognizing our worth, our opinions, feelings, and contributions should be valued. Number two, we should be treated with dignity, kindness, courtesy, and fairness. Number three, I think it is also about honoring our boundaries, respecting the personal space, the limits and preferences. Maybe number four, listening attentively when someone speaks, like you mentioned earlier. Our thoughts and ideas should be heard, should be considered. And number five, last but not least, I think we should be treated as equals and not be judged or discriminated against based on different considerations. I thank you for the opportunity to share. I pass on the talking piece to the next person. Thank you.
Wow, I guess that's me. Well, I'm really glad to be going after Rachel and Paul G because that was quite comprehensive. I guess I can turn my camera on too. Yeah, I don't think I have anything substantially to add to that. The idea of being heard and seen as a whole person, and treated with dignity and the sense of equality that, you know, that we're all human beings here, and that's something that we share, our common humanity, and that's something that should be built upon, you know. I would say focused on rather than, but also our differences need to be valued. So it's quite a subtle conception, I think, respect. But thank you for this opportunity. I'll pass it on to, I guess it's Greg and Carolyn, right?
Yeah, go ahead. I had one, but you can go first.
You go ahead. Yeah.
Mine is same game, same rules. So if I expect my feelings and my opinions to be respected, I must also do the same for everybody else in the room. And there's no double standard. Same game, same rules. That's mine.
I think for me, it's something to do with safety. And as a woman who has been in an abusive relationship and also supports other women in abusive relationships, who have been around men who have belief systems that they're central, superior, and deserving. And as a woman who strives for mutual, equal, and connected, it's something about being heard and feeling safe. And so many women, including me, have had their voices shut down. And so that is, not sure if I'm making sense to the question, but that's what comes up for me. Thank you.
Dan, you're on mute.
Those are such great answers that we've heard. Paul G., did you know in advance you were going to do that? Because you had a very comprehensive answer. But to me, it's just being honored, being what I am and what I believe and where I'm coming from is being honored as much as anything else. So it's equality and value between people.
I think for me, as I look at it's very easy to sort of intellectually acknowledge the benefits and how having respect for others is helpful. But I think what is harder is how do you recognize perhaps when you're not showing respect to see where you maybe need to correct your behavior. I think it's used criteria such as somehow, maybe not even, I would even express it to another person, but if I feel superior in some way to them, that becomes an area in which I think I have to go back and examine where does that feeling come from and how do I simply show love to that person without being in any sense condescending or something towards them. And I think that's a very important part of respect is trying to develop a sense of knowing where you need to personally make improvement. So I'll pass it.
It's hard to add anything to that because everybody's pretty much covered all the areas. But I would add that you have to feel like you're part of a greater whole. And if you're not contributing positively, then you're just defeating the holistic nature of society. You want to make a positive impact on the people around you and, like I said, society as a whole. So I will pass it to number 7.
Well, that would be me. And I totally agree with you, Bill. I think that it's super, super important to examine my own prejudices that I carry within me that I may not even know exist until I get into a group. And then all of a sudden it's like I am confronted with my reactions. And it's like, well, wait a minute. If that were someone else, would I be reacting this way? What is it about, what is it that I've learned? What is it about my worldview that makes me hear those words, see that person in that way, that I react that way? a lot of healing that goes on in a group has to do with personal healing, has to do with personal coming aware of yourself in that setting, in that, okay, it's like, who am I in the world? But it's listening to really, really trying to hear, who are you? Who are you? And when you speak, I hear through my filter. And can I take away a lot of the blah, 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 blah in my filter to actually hear what you're saying, to actually maybe hear with my heart instead of my ears and my brain? So I guess that's, if I go on, I'm just going to be repeating myself. So I'm going to pass it on to whoever is number 8.
So what does being respected mean to me? Well, I guess it's that I see everybody as being a child of God. Everybody has been created noble, and that we're all striving to learn who we are, and in that process we make mistakes, and that our mistakes, be forgiven. Hopefully that, that I will see, that, as I respect other people, that, that we're all in the process of becoming. Some of those mistakes may be huge and have consequences that require, some kind of, reaction to that. And so that, that I suppose a level of justice can be restored, as I think this is along with the topic of there. But I think, that I try to respect that nobility in each person. And, and I'm it means a lot if I get that same kind of respect, back to me too, is that then I feel safe. If I'm, when I'm being judged and not, I guess not treated as if I'm in the process, then I don't feel safe. There you go.
I really appreciate everything that everyone is saying. It shows how deep this issue of respect is. I've noticed when I pay careful attention to myself, I have not been able to respect everyone. So I'm not saintly enough yet. I'm working on the ability to respect everyone. I've also noticed that not everyone is able to respect me. So you get some insight when you look at respect in that way. I've identified two aspects of respect that I pay attention to. I feel respected if I'm appreciatively understood. And what I mean by that is to be appreciated doesn't mean people agree with me or approve of my purposes entirely 100%, but appreciation means there's some sort of acknowledgement, a positive regard for what I'm trying to be or do. And understanding is important to me too. I think it's part of respect. You know enough about what they're really saying or doing to actually be in relation to them. So appreciative understanding to me is part of respect, and it shows the difficulty of it, to appreciate someone's purposes and behavior and to understand it to a degree. Anyway, those are minimal in my mind to respect, and it's really a big project. So everything everyone is saying is part of this. Okay, number 11.
No, I'm number 9. I got.
Oh, I skipped over you, Steve.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Lack of respect. Okay.
I gave you the respect you started, so you just finished up. So that's fine. For me, I think I've come to respect through the understanding that we're all a part of the family of life on this planet, and we each have a right and a destiny in being here. And then I agree with pretty much everything everyone has said, but there's one specific aspect I would mention is that oftentimes, and when I was younger, I would disrespect somebody because I thought they should know better, but at like this point in their life. And it took a while to figure out, even those people very close to us, most of the experiences they've had are not within our intimate knowledge. So their life experience and how they got to be where they are, to say they should know better really goes in the face of, well, it didn't happen. They're where they're at. So we have to look at people at where they're at and then try to meet them there, and to do so to the best of our ability with kindness and love, and then see what happens. So now on to number 12.
11, I think.
I think Tegan's before me.
Yeah.
So I would say that feeling respected to me means when I would say showing compassion, even if we have different viewpoints or some kind of disagreement, that we can still come together and be compassionate. And I would also say like respecting and valuing personal boundaries is also being respectful to me. And I'll pass it on to the next person.
Okay, I must say there's been a pile of wisdom that's gone out. So it's hard to be in the number 12 spot after everyone has said pretty well everything. Like Paul G was so complete, but then everybody added just a little more or another nuance. So it's so amazing. It's interesting. Two things though. I have a new job at it's Change Pain, and there's a group medical visit, and what they say at the start of the class or the session is, we respect everyone's experience as true, like we've all lived our own lives. So whatever our and I think this goes along with what Steve said, whatever our experience is ends up giving us our own reality. So there's that. Another thing is when Baha'is will have a circle, they'll consult together and you put your idea on the table, and then you can't own it. You let other people modify it, because that's how you arrive at truth or problem solving. So it's your ego. If it's my idea, then it's better if you can let go of that. And that's, again, respecting other people's ideas. You give people the opportunity to speak. I've been in conversation with people where I can't get a word in edgewise, so I don't feel respected, but then I apply Kathy's compassionate listening. So obviously that person needs to talk. So it's really, it's really fascinating. One last thing is, when we're in interfaith, it shows respect that we're not trying to convince the other people from different faiths that the validity of our own, as our opening prayer is, we all are as different as leaves. We all bring our own selves here, and we're just coming together in love. So thanks for the opportunity to express. And over to Donna.
Oh, Donna, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
Is it okay now? Can you hear me now? Okay. I was saying, I came up with this just listening to everybody. You know how we learn the ABCs of everything, the ABCs? Well, I came up with the CDEs of respect. And it's simply this: we are connected, C, we are different, D, and we are equal. So that's my little contribution today.
Now over to Cam in the room.
Okay, we're on. You can start, Cam.
Okay. Well, when I think about times when I feel that I've experienced respect personally, I think it often has a kind of counterintuitive nature, or you have to really think about what happened. It's not there on the surface. So it's maybe times when you're accepting criticism, or it's a kind of loving, a critique of something that's difficult to face, and particularly when you're navigating, say, issues of privilege or racial, economic, heteronormative privilege, this sense of a loving criticism that changes you, and ultimately it's the deepest respect and love. And then I think personally, the times when I really felt it, it's often sort of nonverbal, or it's not a fancy compliment. It's an acknowledgement, a quick thank you, or we both just know in our hearts. And those seem to be the most meaningful, and particularly when it happens across people that are different, or religiously, racially, economically, language, when you feel like you've crossed some kind of divide and found a oneness, and it's often not a thing of words, it's a knowing. That seems to be the most meaningful moments of shared respect.
I love everything everyone has said, and I can't add anything. Sorry.
Be sorry. I guess all I could add is, as somebody who has a lot of inherent privilege, white, male, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, etc., learning to be vulnerable, like having those experiences where you are not the dominant person in the circle, is really important in terms of learning how to offer respect to others, to have that kind of experience too.
Dorothy, yeah. I had to stand up because my back was bothering me, and so I was standing here reflecting on the degree of self-respect required too, which I think is an interesting part of so many beautiful things we're talking about. Just feel like in the center there too is something about the need to respect oneself, and through that is like kind of the emergence of light that can come out in that respect. Like, if I'm not being respectful for my own boundaries or my own needs in a way that I care for myself, it's very difficult to do that to others. It was something you were talking about, Sue, that really reflected, like, kind of brought that up for me. So I think that, yeah, there's something inherently important about self-respect, which is not entitlement. It's not the same as that, or kind of a sense of expectation that others treat, but it's about a kind of a grounding in understanding that as a human being, there are basic pieces of care and loving that I deserve, and through that, then that extension goes outward, that others equally deserve that extension of love and care. I don't need to agree with somebody, but then understanding that treating them in a way that affirms their humanness and not discredit their inherent right to also be respected is kind of part of that. So, but it has to start with self-respect as well. Because if this water is muddied, this is very good reflection right now, but it's very difficult to do that to others then as well. So that's my thought in relation to everything else beautifully that's been shared. Thank you. Passing to Kathy.
Thank you. So I'm thinking about respect in terms of children, because we have some children here on top of us. And and that's something we talk about with the kids, is respect, and in both directions. So not expecting the kids to act like adults,
but also not allowing them to kind of infringe on others' rights or others' needs or autonomy. And so like allowing the other being to have autonomy, to take the time to listen to them, to let them be who they are, to kind of understand that they're different than you, they're, you know, in various ways, and not needing them to be just like you, and taking the time to listen to that, but also needing it to go both ways so that you have your own space and your own needs are accepted as well. And I was thinking, I think for me, the times I find it the hardest to respect someone is if I know that they show either me or others no respect. And that's something that I've thought about myself with certain like world leaders, where I feel like they're very disrespectful to people. So I'll feel myself kind of wanting to make fun of them, or kind of not taking them seriously. There's like an element of not taking someone seriously when you don't respect them. And so I've thought for myself, like, oh, maybe I need to be in more integrity. If I believe people need respect, even if this person is terrible, maybe I shouldn't kind of perpetuate certain levels of disrespect towards them. And over to Cindy.
I have the most time to think. So I think for me, respect comes down to three things. My time being respected, being listened to, and what I say not being dismissed out of hand, and my differences not automatically being considered flaws.